After mounting pressure, the NBA is allowing free Hong Kong to be printed on their customizable jerseys. NTD's Miguel Moreno contacted the NBA asking why the system rejected the slogan for freedom initially, but so far, no response.
Free Hong Kong can now be printed on the NBA store's jerseys, but this wasn't possible on Monday and possibly not before that either. The NBA took heat on social media when users learned they couldn't print Free Hong Kong on their jerseys. We verified the claim ourselves. The system would give us an error code for the slogan, but misspellings of Free Hong Kong were allowed. High-profile people, including Senator Josh Hawley, took note of the controversy and condemned the NBA. Hawley saying on Twitter, "Of course, NBA Incorporated doesn't dare offend the paymasters in Beijing." Yahoo Finance says, according to multiple sources close to the league, China's market accounts for nearly 10% of the league's global revenue. The NBA commissioner himself said in February that the league would likely lose hundreds of millions of dollars because China appears to have put the NBA in timeout, cutting off sponsorships and stopping games from airing on CCTV. That was retaliation on China's part in response to a tweet from the Houston Rockets general manager in October expressing his support for the pro-democracy Hong Kong protesters. The NBA apologized to China for his tweet and called it an inappropriate remark in Chinese. Miguel Moreno, NTD News.
Regions in southern China are struggling more and more as heavy rain continues. But one TV host from a state-run media outlet says the serious flooding is just an illusion. NTD's Juliet Song has the story.
Heavy rain is still battering China, and the flooding is getting worse. It's already destroyed millions of homes. But one Chinese TV host from a state-run broadcaster has other ideas. She says the flooding is merely an illusion.
Why is the flooding seemingly getting worse despite the many dams that have been built? It's because the internet has become so convenient, feeding information about the flooding to your cell phones non-stop. It creates the illusion that the flooding is getting worse.
Online, one comment left by a user was upvoted over 1,000 times. In a sarcastic tone, it reads, "So, it's all the internet's fault. If the world only has TV and no internet, with a host like this, won't it just be a peaceful world for everyone?" The comment comes as locals in some regions continue to suffer.
The water is going into my house. It's going into my house. Sound the alarm. Sound the alarm.
In the southeastern province of Anhui, the water level of nearly 30 rivers have risen above the warning level. Some embankments have also burst or are on the brink of collapse.
This flood is almost as bad as the one in 1998, and the water is still rising. The situation is pretty dire.
Another major flood back in 1998 was the worst in recent decades. But this year's flooding is no less serious. In Anhui, over 2 million people have already been impacted by the disaster. Many of them have been forced to abandon their homes. Another nearby province, Jiangxi, is among the worst hit in China. Locals are now grappling with flood control. Videos circulating online show residents being urged to evacuate as soon as possible.
The water level is expected to rise up to 95 feet above sea level. The flood control is in a dire situation. To make sure that you and your possessions are safe, everyone please clean up your belongings and seek help from friends and family.
But in another city, a resident told us that no one in his area has evacuated. To protect his identity, we gave him a pseudonym and distorted his voice.
The flooding is really bad here, but the government is not organizing evacuations.
He said some locals are now homeless with no food to eat, and that there isn't enough space in shelters to go around.
Many people are now trapped. The situation is urgent.
One internet user posted a video on Twitter explaining that some of the newly homeless people have fled to a nearby mountain area. Chen Han and Juliet Song, NTD News.
The State Department says China is using threats and coercion to advance its interests in the South China Sea. An official said U.S. military involvement in the region is not provocative. Instead, it is to uphold international law.
The State Department said the Chinese regime is advancing a might makes right campaign in the South China Sea. An official said Beijing is trying to control the region. He said Beijing is denying international law while using threats and coercion to dominate the area.
In recent months, Beijing has sunk Vietnamese fishing vessels. It sent an armed flotilla to harass Malaysian offshore energy exploration and wielded maritime militia to surround Philippine outposts. Beijing has further militarized its artificial islands in the Spratlys with new aircraft deployments. It has announced unilateral fishing bans. It has conducted destabilizing military exercises in the contested waters around these disputed features.
The official said Beijing increasingly uses man-made islands as a military base. It launches harassment operations to block Southeast Asian countries from gaining resources like oil, gas, and fish. The Association of Southeast Asian Nations is called ASEAN. This includes the Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam, among others. A Filipino analyst says ASEAN should work to curb China's military presence in the sea before working on an agreement.
What we need is a freeze on further militarization, on further aggressive naval exercises, on further provocative action by paramilitary forces, militia forces. I think that is what the ASEAN should really focus on, freezing the situation first before we can properly talking about the rules of the road or even ambitiously, illegally binding code of conduct. So I think it's impossible.
The director at a Vietnamese research institute says there is concern China is taking advantage of the pandemic to advance its agenda.
And a major concern has been that China would be taking advantage of the vulnerability of countries in the region in the fight against COVID-19 to push ahead with its assertiveness and its presence in the South China Sea.
He says that concern is furthered by the fear that the Chinese regime is expanding its influence around its periphery. This is evidenced by Beijing's encroachment on Hong Kong, its conflict at the Indian border, and its assertiveness in the South China Sea. Kevin Hogan, NTD News.
Liu Lipeng finally has the freedom to talk to our reporters about the CCP's internet censorship based on his personal experiences as a web censor. Liu has been working in internet censorship, what he calls a dirty industry, for over a decade. He used to work as a web censor for the Chinese microblogging site Sina Weibo, and later became the head of the censorship department at Le.com, one of the largest online video companies in China. Both companies are privately owned. Liu estimates China's private sector employs about 1 to 2 million web censors, almost as many as their Communist Party web commentators, commonly known as the 50 Cent Army. Web censors and the 50 Cent Army both work to suppress free speech. They delete posts that the authorities don't want people to see and spread fake or distorted news online. The 50 Cent Army is paid by the regime. However, the CCP doesn't want to pay to censor content from private internet companies. So to abide by the party's censorship regulations, all private internet companies have to hire their own web censors, which can amount to a large number. Liu says TikTok has at least 10,000 web censors, some of whom work at the company's Tianjin branch. TikTok is a video-sharing social networking service and very popular in the US and Europe. It is owned by Chinese company ByteDance. Liu described his experience visiting that branch for an interview as entering into a drug lord's lair. Everything there seemed hidden, and he was strictly forbidden from looking around while in the building. He was also kept away from the main working areas. Later, he discovered something TikTok has tried to hide.
I later realized TikTok was censoring American people's speech there. This huge number of Chinese web censors have been brainwashed by the CCP's propaganda for decades, and many of them are CCP members. These people living in fear of the CCP were there to censor American people's speech.
Liu explains TikTok has to obey CCP rules, even if it wants to operate in overseas markets. But it is impossible to apply the same level of censorship outside China, so the company has to promise the party it will do anything to stop Chinese people from using TikTok. He told us about who is not allowed to use TikTok.
The Chinese are not allowed to access TikTok. If you use a made-in-China cell phone, or if you have a Chinese SIM card, or if you are personally in China, any of these conditions will keep you out of TikTok.
Liu says the only reason TikTok has to withdraw from the Hong Kong market is that it overlaps with Douyin, the Chinese version of TikTok, which is only allowed to be used by Chinese people. Unlike other companies like Facebook or Google, TikTok did not mention anything about the national security law when they announced the withdrawal. Reporting by Xi Wenhui, NTD News.